And welcome back to night 2 of our 2-night series of the life and wrongful execution of Edith Thompson. And as we discussed in yesterday's episode, Percy was exhumed, and having once discovered that he had not been poisoned by Edith and there was no ground glass in his system, his family decided that they didn't want him put back into this grave. So he was moved to another part of the cemetery, not far from here, so I'll walk you there now. As we say farewell to Edith for now. You'll cross over and you'll want to be heading towards St Andrew's Road. Which is just on the left over here. St Andrew's Road. And with Percy's grave, his second grave, because like with Edith, he has been buried on more than one occasion. It's one I filmed earlier, and there's a little bit of an upcoming surprise with that, as you'll discover soon. Percy's buried up in this raised area. You'll want to go up the hill to where these bushes are. And Percy is the second row in, so along here. And as I say, it's one I filmed earlier. Percy is just along there, so you'll join me at the grave with the one I filmed earlier, and then for the surprise. So join me there. And here we are at Percy Thompson's second grave. It's an interesting scenario with both these graves, because Edith was buried on 3 separate occasions and Percy here is buried on 2 separate occasions. He was, as I said, originally in the grave that Edith is now in with her parents, but he had to be exhumed, which occurred on the 3rd of November 1922, to see whether there were any traces of poison or ground glass in his system, none of which was found, of course. And after that, his family decided that they didn't want him buried back in that grave, which was purchased by Edith. So they had him moved here to square 178, and it's grave number 93885. So the interesting scenario with Edith and with Percy, Edith was buried on 3 separate occasions and Percy buried on 2 separate occasions. And the inscription reads, "Sacred to the memory of our dear brother, Percy Thompson, who died suddenly on October the 4th, 1922, aged 32 years. For him, peace at last." And as you can see, Percy's grave looks nothing like Edith's, and it's in a a wee little bit of a mess. So, on that note, and here we are, after 4 separate days work, 5 bottles of bleach and 2 bottles of washing up liquid, and a hell of a lot of elbow grease. Percy's grave is now cleaned up and looking nice. And our next little snippet of video, I'll talk you through the clean-up process. And here you see it part way through its clean-up. And to get the stone lovely and white like that, all you use is very thick, cheap bleach, washing up liquid, a wire brush, and a lot of elbow grease. And as you can see, Percy's inscription is still in pretty perfect condition, but being the side that catches all the weather on, Percy's buried with his brother Richard Halliday Thompson, and he died on December the 29th 1951, aged 58, and also his sister. And being on the side that cops all the weather, a lot of her letters have fallen out unfortunately over the years, but we'll be able to kind of put that right as best we can. And she died on January the 9th 1947, and his brother and sister were both cremated, and their cremated remains are in here with Percy, so he's not on his own. And there you have it, the finished article. All scrubbed, washed, and the lettering re-blackened. Sacred to the memory of our dear brother Percy Thompson, who died suddenly on October the 4th 1922, aged 32 years. For him, peace at last. And as I said during the clean-up process, Percy is not on his own, because he is buried with his sister and brother. And as I showed you, Lily A. Chambers' letters, a lot of which were missing, I've managed to repaint them back in. Also in affectionate remembrance of our dear sister, Lily A. Chambers, who passed away January the 9th 1947 and was cremated, and their brother, the man who actually purchased and owns this grave, or owned it, Richard Halliday Thompson, who died on December the 29th 1951, aged 58 years, cremated at Charing in Kent, and whose ashes are interred here. Sleep on, beloved. And the owner of the grave, R.H. Thompson, Richard Halliday Thompson. His name is at the foot of the grave. So that's the restoration of the grave of Percy Thompson. Hope you all found this little process interesting. And now we leave them behind, we go back on with our case, which covers the imprisonment, the trial, and executions. So join me for that now. The trial began on the 6th of December 1922 at the Old Bailey before Mr. Justice Shearman, with Bywaters defended by Cecil Whitley, KC, and Edith Thompson by Sir Henry Curtis Bennett, KC. The prosecution for the Crown was led by the Solicitor General, Sir Thomas Inskip, assisted by Travers Humphreys. Bywaters had cooperated completely. He had led the police to the murder weapon, he had concealed after the murder, and consistently maintained that he had acted without Edith's knowledge. Edith Thompson's love letters were produced as evidence for the incitement of murder. The extant letters date from November 1921 to the end of September 1922. They run to over 55,000 words and afford a day-to-day account of her life in London when her lover Bywaters was at sea. In a few passages of these letters, she writes about her longing to be free from her husband Percy. She refers to grinding glass light bulbs into shards and feeding them to Percy, mixed into mashed potato, and on another occasion feeding him poison. She wrote of a woman who had lost 3 husbands and remarked, "I can't even lose one." Thompson described how she had carried out her own abortion after becoming pregnant by Bywaters. Edith Thompson's counsel urged her not to testify, stressing that the burden of proof lay within the prosecution and that there was nothing that they could do to prove other than that she had been present at the murder. But she rejected his advice. She was determined to give evidence, imagining that she could save Bywaters. As Curtis Bennett later observed, she had no conception of the danger she was in. She made a poor impression on the judge and jury, particularly when she repeatedly contradicted herself. She had claimed that she had never attempted to poison her husband, and the references in the letters attempting to kill him were merely attempts to impress her paramour. In answer to several questions relating to the meaning of some of the passages in her letters, all she could reply was, "I have no idea." Bywaters stated that Edith Thompson had known nothing of his plans, nor could she have, as he had not intended to murder her husband. His aim had been to confront Percy, he claimed, and to force him to deal with the situation. When Percy threatened to shoot him and reacted in a superior manner, Bywaters lost his temper. Edith Thompson, he repeatedly claimed, had made no suggestion to him to kill Percy, nor did she know that Bywaters intended to confront him. In discussion in the letters, Bywaters stated that he had never believed Edith had attempted to harm her husband, but that he believed she had a vivid imagination, which was fueled by novels she enjoyed reading. He felt that in her letters she viewed herself in some way as a fictional character that she had read about. On the 11th of December, the jury returned a verdict of guilty against both defendants. Both Thompson and Bywaters were sentenced to death by hanging. Edith Thompson became hysterical and started screaming in the court, while Bywaters loudly protested to Edith's innocence, stating, "I say the verdict of the jury is wrong. Edith Thompson is not guilty." Edith Thompson was imprisoned at Holloway Prison, which you see here, and Frederick Bywaters was imprisoned at Pentonville Prison, which you see here. Before and during the trial, Thompson and Bywaters were the subjects of highly sensationalist and critical media commentary, but after they were sentenced to death, there was a dramatic shift in public attitudes and in media coverage. Nearly 1 million people signed a petition against their death sentences. And this is Edith's parents reading letters of support, and Edith's mother even sent this petition to the king by telegram to try and save her daughter. Frederick Bywaters in particular attracted admiration for his fierce loyalty and protectiveness towards Edith Thompson, but she was widely regarded as the controlling mind that had set it all up, the murder of her husband Percy Thompson. It was generally considered abhorrent to hang a woman, No woman had been executed in Britain since the baby farmer Rhoda Willis in 1907. Despite the petition and the telegram to the King, and a new confession from Frederick Bywaters, in which he once again declared Edith Thompson to be completely innocent, the Home Secretary William Bridgeman refused a reprieve. A few days before their executions, Edith was told that the date of the execution had been fixed, at which point she lost her composure. She spent the last few days of her life in a state of near hysteria, crying, screaming and moaning, and unable to eat. On the 9th of January 1923, in Holloway Prison, the 29-year-old Edith Thompson collapsed in terror at the prospect of her hanging. Heavily sedated by the prison governor, almost unconscious, she was carried to the gallows by 4 prison warders. In Pentonville Prison, the 20-year-old Frederick Bywaters, who had tried since his arrest to save Edith Thompson from imprisonment and execution, was hanged himself. The 2 executions occurred simultaneously at 9 AM, only about a quarter of a mile apart. The ordeal of executing Edith Thompson had a profound effect on her hangman, John Ellis, and here you can see her death certificate that was issued from within Holloway Prison. As was the rule at the time, the bodies of Edith Thompson and Frederick Bywaters were initially buried within the walls of the prisons in which they had been executed, and here you can see HM Prison, Holloway, Register of Graves, and Edith Thompson is grave number 3, marked with the arrow. And Frederick Bywaters, his grave in Pentonville Prison, in which he still lies resting until this very day. You can see a picture of the area in which the executed of that prison were interred. In 1971, Holloway Prison underwent an extensive programme of rebuilding, during which the bodies of all executed women were exhumed for reburial outside the confines of the prison. Apart from Ruth Ellis, who was buried elsewhere in a churchyard, Edith Thompson, Stylu Christofi, Amelia Sachs, Annie Walters were all buried in a single grave at Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey. The new grave in plot 117 remained unmarked for over 20 years, but on November the 13th, 1993, a grey granite memorial was placed on plot 117 and dedicated to the memory of the 4 women buried there. Permission was given in 2018, in September 2018, for Edith to be exhumed from Brookwood Cemetery, and this is that exhumation order that you can see here. And on the 22nd of November 2018, Edith Thompson's remains were exhumed from Brookwood Cemetery, and 2 days later were formally buried alongside her parents in accordance with her mother's wishes in the City of London Cemetery. And this is November 2018, Brookwood Cemetery. Edith Thompson's remains have just been recovered. And this is that grave in the City of London Cemetery in which she now lies resting, and this is it in November 2018, and before it was restored and Edith's name added in 2019. And this is the funeral procession to that grave to lay Edith to rest in what is hopefully her final resting place. And that is the life and tragic end of Edith Jessie Thompson, 25th of December 1893, and wrongfully executed on the 9th of January 1923. And as I said and explained, she is a lady that was buried on 3 separate occasions, first in Holloway Prison, then in Brookwood Cemetery, and then moved here with her family fought and got permission to have her moved here with her parents, which occurred in 2018, and the grave itself was restored to this fine condition in 2019. And I hope you've all found this informative and interesting. Thanks for watching, and for our next and last video for today, you'll join me back at the traditional crematorium.